to go across to Manish Tewari for a perspective from the Congress. We've heard from Piyush Goyal, we've heard from Ashwini Vaishnav, Mr. Tewari. Instead of immediate populism with an eye on the assembly elections in March, the government says we're looking at a 25-year horizon. We're not looking for instant coffee. We're looking to brew the beans of growth, which will show results in the time to come. And therefore, this is not a government that's driven by politics, but it's driven by long-term good economics.
Well, thank you very much for having me on your show. As Keynes had very presciently pointed out that in the long term, all of us would be dead. So therefore, let's leave that as it is. If somebody wants to look at a 25-year or a 50-year or a century long perspective, that's entirely their call. But I think what really concerns us is the immediate and the now. And as you very rightly asked Minister Vaishnav, the situation with regard to unemployment in this country is something which needs to be addressed with the urgency and the dispatch which this government is not addressing it. The unemployment rate is at an unprecedented high of about 7%, but that does not tell the whole story at all. If you look at the entire spectrum of employment in this country, you have about 40.6 crore people who are employed. And if you go by global benchmarks, which is 60% of the population needs to be employed, this means that you have to create and generate 40 crore more avenues of employment or sources of livelihood. And I do not think that this budget is going in that direction. Number two, if you were to look at a budget in its purest form, it's really about the income and the expenditure of the government. And unfortunately, the expenditure of the government, far, far outweighs whatever is the revenue that they are able to garner or they're able to project. Even if you look at 22-23 in a perspective, all that they are going to get in terms of revenue is about 22 lakh odd crores, while they're going to be spending about 39 lakh odd crores. This means that the government is going to borrow about 16 lakh crores from the market in order to balance their books. So if the government is going to borrow 16 lakh crores, where is the wiggle room for the private sector in order to access the capital markets, in order to kickstart their own engines? Because essentially what you're seeing is government trying to fire the engines of the economy by a government-led spending plan. Essentially, neither is consumer expenditure picking up, nor is private investment picking up. Okay. So therefore, this is an unsustainable model, Rahul. And unfortunately, beyond the hype and the hoopla, the real hard numbers tell a different story altogether.
Thank you very much, Manish Tewari, for joining us. Let's go across to Sanjeev Mehta from Hindustan Unilever, as one of the top FMCG companies in the country. What's your sense of how consumer mood is at this time? Do you think that people have started looking beyond the pandemic spending? Because one of the key engines for growth is consumer expenditure, which has been tepid on account of economic distress, on account of the pandemic. Are we emerging from that cycle, Mr. Mehta?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Good evening, Rahul. You're absolutely right. If we have to look at two stress areas in the economy, one is private consumption expenditure, and the other is something which is intertwined with this is private capital investment. That's a reality. It has been tepid. But during this period, when the private consumption and private investment is tepid, the government had to step in, and that's what the industry was clamoring for. And I'm so pleased that instead of getting into a neoclassical trap of fiscal conservatism, the finance minister had a courage to not sharply decline the fiscal deficit, but have a glide path and spend the money, which will hopefully result in, first is crowding in private investment. Second is kickstarting what we would call is the virtuous spiral of growth. That is more investment coming in, and which would impact several industries, which in turn would result in capacity utilization going up, new capacities being created, more jobs being created, more money in the hands of people, And that's how the virtuous cycle starts. So I think as an industry, that's what we were clamoring for. And we are very pleased that the government has embarked on this path.
Let's go across to Dr. Rajiv Kumar, and I want to press him on the issue of disinvestment, because if you look at the disinvestment target that the government has put out, it's only 65,000 crore rupees. In years gone by, it's been 1,75,000. In 21, it was 2,10,000 crores. And I'm not fully convinced about why the government has brought this down. The naysayer in me says that the government is looking at foreign portfolio investment coming down, the Federal Reserve raising interest rates in March, realizing that there won't be as much easy money available to companies as they look to disinvest or come out with IPOs like there was over the last year and a half. And therefore, let's be realistic and conservative. The other is, let's just under-commit and over-deliver. Also, on the issue of BPCL, if the estimated enterprise value of BPCL is 85,000 crore rupees and your disinvestment target is only 65,000 crores, then even though you haven't said anything, but I wonder if BPCL is no longer on the list of companies you hope to privatize in the year to come. Dr. Kumar.
Hi, Rahul. I think you've got it about right, which is that the government wants to be realistic about the disinvestment targets on the one hand, and I think there is a bit of conservatism in these targets, because now the disinvestment process, the privatization process after Air India's and the NLRN, I think is now well oiled. The process is well known. The markets are ready, etc. So I think we will get probably a higher achievement than what has been targeted. I think you're right about the impact of the Fed raising their interest rates, because there will be a capital moving away to onshore in the US, and so that is of course a concern, and that is of course a factor to be taken into account. About the BPCL, I'm not so sure because and I'm not sure whether the BPCL is still on the books for this current year, because the current year's target is 78,000 crores, and I think about the Tatas paid about 18,000 for Air India, and we got 12,000 for NLRN, so there is still a way to go there. But I think realism combined with a degree of conservatism to deliver more rather than raise expectations, I think is the answer to what's happening on the privatization revenues.
Also on the issue of capital expenditure, you've announced that capital expenditure will be increased by 35%. We had Dr. Subhash Garg, former Finance Secretary, on the broadcast, and one of the points that he makes is that this is a bit of financial jugglery. The actual increase will not be 35% because this is on account also of the money that's being given to states and for green bonds, which is borrowing for the public sector, and therefore it's not really capital expenditure of 35% more than last year. Secondly, in the year gone by, the government wasn't able to achieve the announcements that it had already made. So money that you said you had, which you clearly had because GST numbers were up, tax numbers were up, so you had the money to spend, but you simply couldn't spend. So if you couldn't spend the money last year, what makes you very confident that you will be able to achieve this heightened number that you've committed to in this budget?
I'm really surprised at Mr. Subhash Garg saying this, because he has been the Finance Secretary and the Secretary of Economic Affairs. If you look at the numbers, Rahul, the capital expenditure allocation for 21-22 was 5.5 lakh crores in the budget estimates, and the revised estimates have come in at 6.004 lakh crores, which is a 50,000 crore higher than what was the budget estimate. So not only was the entire amount spent, but there was more spent than there was originally allocated. That's one point. The second point is that the 7.5 lakh crore announcement allocation for public capex is not at all a financial jugglery, because over and above that you transfer about 3 lakh crore to the states, so that the effective, as the Finance Minister said in her speech, the effective capital expenditure is 10.5 lakh crore actually, and not the 7.5 lakh crore, which will be spent entirely. Plus, over and above that is a 1 lakh crore allocated for states as a 50-year-long interest-free loan, provided they come up with their own infrastructure development, to which the central government will contribute, so that the infrastructure development is incentivized as well. So I am afraid my friend Subhash has, on this occasion, got it wrong.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Rajiv Kumar. I have time for one final question to Sanjeev Mehta of Hindustan Unilever, and this is to do with India's investment cycle in the private sector. One of the concerns in government and outside has been the private sector not investing aggressively in the India story. Now that capacity utilization is in the mid-70s, given that we're now coming out of a pandemic, as President Fiki, when you talk to your members in India Inc., are you getting a sense that they're still in wait-and-watch mode to see whether there's another variant lurking in the shadows? Or do you think that they've factored in, discounted whatever disruption the pandemic could have caused and are now looking to invest again in the India story?
Rahul, first, let me tell you, there is no hesitation in Indian industry to invest in capex. And also, let me also assure you that the risk appetite has not reduced. And also, one must accept that the twin balance sheet problem is no longer in our lingo anymore. So the corporates have also deleveraged. The profits have been good. The only important bit which I would still come to is private consumption. Linked to it is the private capex. Because once the capacity utilization, which is still in the 60 to 70 range, crosses the 75% mark on a sustained basis, then people start putting in investments. And we've had 3 disruptions because of pandemic. If we are now starting to see the beginning of an end, you will start seeing the capex bounce back in the coming fiscal year.
Okay, interesting. You're committing to that on behalf of the big industry chambers. It'll be interesting to see whether your members and others walk the talk, because ultimately it's money that talks loudest and everything else is a claim. You're saying, yes.
Rahul, I'll give you my example of my company, Hindustan Unilever. We haven't shirked away from investing. We have a long-term view. We believe in the India growth story, and we have continued to invest, and we will continue to invest.
You know, and the broad sense that we're picking up really is that the worst is most probably behind us. The last 2 years have been torrid, they've been tough, but on account of a global recovery, be the pandemic nearing its end, hopefully, God willing, and the fact that this Omicron wave is coming down, India just seems poised for a takeoff of sorts. Remember, the rationalization of corporate taxation has started a healthy earnings cycle. Companies now once again getting the appetite, potentially the confidence of looking at investing again. Sanjeev Mehta sounds confident. We will track very closely whether this happens or not, because many a times one of the stories of India has been the story of potential which never got realized. Is this the point from where the India growth story takes off? We'll continue tracking this budget and the state of the economy very, very carefully. I hope you enjoyed our broadcast through the day. I'm taking a break, but Rajdeep Sardesai comes up with news today. He'll have Udayan Mukherjee joining us from London. He's got Montek Singh Ahluwalia, Amitabh Kant, CEO of Niti Aayog. So we've got lots of Power Pack programming, and then Udayan will be back at 10 p.m. So we have a very strong primetime lineup, and I hope you stay back and watch our coverage. We return on the other side of a very quick break.